Hello. Um, we're live. Okay, wait, sorry. Right. Sorry, I'm just drinking water. Waiting for people to join. Um, yep. Um, hello? Can you guys hear me? Is anyone actually watching? Okay. Um, okay. Whether or not anyone is watching, I am gonna start. Okay. The state and globalization. The state, the nation state. A nation state exists when the cultural boundaries of a nation, a group of people sharing common identity, history, and language, match the political borders of a state, a defined territory within a government. In short, it is a political community bound together by citizenship and nationality. Okay, so Japan. A textbook nation state, over 97% of its population is ethnically Japanese, sharing a single language, culture, and deep historical identity. The political state of Japan exists almost exclusively to govern the Japanese nation. Iceland, a culturally isolated, homogeneous nation state, its population shares a distinct Scandinavian heritage, language, and ancestral continuity, perfectly marrying the cultural nation with the sovereign state. The United Kingdom. The United Kingdom is a single sovereign state, but it is also not a pure nation state. It is a multinational state composed of four distinct nations: England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. So, national sovereignty is when the Westphalian principle that a state possesses absolute supreme authority to govern itself, make its own laws, and maintain a monopoly on the legitimate use of force within its borders without external interference. Internal sovereignty. This is the state's undisputed legal supremacy inside its own borders. Singapore strictly enforces its laws, such as mandatory death penalties for drug trafficking, regardless of international criticism or the nationality of the offender. If a foreign state tries to intervene, sorry, Singapore asserts its internal sovereignty, maintaining that its courts have absolute domestic power. The Chinese government asserts absolute internal authority over its citizens through tools like the Great Firewall, restricting internet access, and its domestic social credit system. China rejects any external Western criticism regarding human rights, viewing it as an infringement on its sovereign right to govern its subjects as it sees fit. The French state exerts internal sovereignty by enforcing, I'm not pronouncing that, laïcité, strict secularism. It legally prohibits the wearing of conspicuous religious symbols like hijabs or large crosses in public schools and state buildings, dictating the civic behaviour of its citizens. Okay, so external sovereignty. This is the state's right to act independently on the global stage and protect its territorial integrity. The Russian invasion of Ukraine is a crucial contemporary example of a direct violation of external sovereignty and territorial integrity. Russia's invasion explicitly threatened Ukraine's sovereign right as an independent nation-state to determine its own foreign policy, such as its desire to join NATO. The entire political campaign for the UK to leave the European Union fought. Have I got any exam? There's no 7 marker. Okay, there's no 7 marker, so I have no exam structure tips for the 7 marker. The entire political campaign for the UK to leave the European Union was fought under the banner of taking back control, a direct appeal to restoring national sovereignty. The UK argued that institutions, like the European Court of Justice, EU institutions, diluted British national sovereignty by imposing laws over British citizens. By leaving, the UK reasserted its absolute supreme law-making authority. Globalization, interconnectedness, social interconnectedness. The COVID-19 pandemic, the virus spread rapidly across borders due to global travel and migration networks. 3 streams and now no exam structure tips. I'm sorry, I know I'm useless. The virus spread rapidly across borders due to global travel and migration networks. The government coordinated responses through bodies like the World Health Organization. I'm not renewing my tip. No, please, I'm sorry. I'll do a structure tip next year. The climate change movement spreads rapidly across borders due to global digital networks and youth activist communities. Citizens coordinate global strikes and awareness campaigns through international bodies like Fridays for Future. Fast fashion and lifestyle trends spread rapidly across borders due to algorithmic social media feeds and global logistics networks. Consumers coordinate flash mobs, product reviews, and unboxing communities through international platforms like YouTube and Reddit. Shows how individuals and societies are deeply interconnected globally, with local events having worldwide consequences. Oh, whoops. Economic interconnectedness. The 2008 global financial crisis demonstrated how deeply integrated international banking networks can turn a localized housing crash into a global recession. The crisis accelerated rapidly as complex, toxic US mortgage securities were bought by financial institutions across Europe and Asia, causing global interbank lending to freeze overnight when those assets collapsed. In response, the international community leveraged its interconnectedness to stabilize the economy. The US Federal Reserve established emergency currency swap lines with major central banks like the European Central Bank to restore liquidity, while world leaders used the G20 forum to coordinate simultaneous fiscal stimulus packages and prevent protectionism, ultimately establishing stricter international banking standards through the Base 3 Accords. The 2021 Suez Canal blockage highlighted the vulnerability of some modern supply chains. When the container ship Ever Given ran aground, it instantly halted 12% of global trade, stranding hundreds of vessels and stalling manufacturing supply lines worldwide. This disruption triggered a critical shortage of shipping containers in Asian manufacturing hubs, and caused global freight prices to skyrocket within days. To resolve the crisis and mitigate the fallout, global logistics networks reacted dynamically. Halos. Um, Shipping companies used real-time satellite tracking to instantly reroute ships around Africa. International salvage experts from multiple nations collaborated with Egyptian authorities to free the vessel, and cargo firms shifted priority goods onto air and trans-Eurasian rail networks. Yeah, yeah, this is me without the voice changer. This is how I sound. Demonstrates interdependence of national economies where production is globally integrated. Technological interconnectedness. Regarding the microchip supply chain, a single microchip requires American design, Dutch machinery, and Taiwanese fabrication. Because of this deep dependency, a localized disruption like cyber attack or earthquake, like yeah, instantly halts car and smartphone production worldwide. Conversely, this connection allows global tech firms to collaborate digitally and accelerate hardware innovation. Distributed data centers allow a startup anywhere to launch apps globally in seconds. However, this deep integration creates systemic vulnerabilities. A single outage at a major cloud provider or a severed subsea cable can instantly knock out banking, healthcare, and communication systems across multiple countries. Um, shows how shows how technology links states, but also creates new tensions within globalization. Political interconnectedness. The Paris Agreement demonstrates how nations legally bind themselves to shared environmental targets to combat global warming. Nearly 200 countries coordinate through a single UN framework, submitting individual emission goals that are reviewed globally. This structure means one major nation shifting its climate policy instantly reshapes global carbon markets and international diplomatic relations. Multilateral sanctions networks, multilateral sanctions networks show how governments collectively use economic power to enforce international law. When a nation violates global norms, alliances like the EU and G7 coordinate to freeze assets and restrict trade simultaneously. This unified political response closes loopholes but also creates ripple effects, forcing neutral countries to realign their trade routes overnight. When are you gonna do USA? Never o'clock, sorry to say. Shows states are politically interconnected, relying on cooperation to solve global problems. Impacts widening and interconnectedness and interdependence. I think that's supposed to say widening interconnectedness and independence. Not okay, it doesn't matter. The 2008 global financial crisis or COVID-19 pandemic, a virus originating in one city or a banking collapse in Wall Street instantly triggered global economic lockdowns and supply chain halts, demonstrating that no state can fully insulate itself. Challenge to state control over citizen law. The European Court of Human Rights (ECHR) in 2022 an ECHR interim injunction interim injunction blocked the UK's government scheduled deportation flights to Rwanda, showcasing how international human rights laws directly restrict domestic state policy and border control. Development of international law. The International Criminal Court (ICC). The ICC prosecuted and convicted former Congolese warlord Thomas Lubanga for war crimes. This proves that state sovereignty no longer shields individuals from international criminal accountability. Humanitarian and forcible intervention. The 2011 NATO's intervention in Libya, the UN's Security Council, passed resolution in 1973, authorizing military action to prevent civilians from Muammar Gaddafi's forces, directly overriding Libya's state sovereignty on humanitarian grounds. Hyperglobalizers. The state is obsolete. Transnational corporations, borderless economic flows, and global governance hold the real power. The Eurozone or the EU demonstrates states lost control of national currencies and borders. Alignment with liberalism, interdependence creates absolute gains and reduces war. Okay, globalization skeptics. Okay. The state is dominant. Globalization is a myth as regional trade blocs are just states maximizing power. The US-China trade war is a key example of states actively reasserting borders and economic control. Links to realism. The world remains an anarchic, zero-sum struggle between states. Transformationalists. The state is transformed. Sovereignty is not lost, but pooled, adapted, and reshaped. The G7 and G20 tax agreements emanate this, with states cooperating globally to retain their domestic taxing power. Links to neoliberal / constructivist power architecture is changing into a multi-layered system. Globalization advantages versus disadvantages. Cultural impact of globalization. Cultural globalization has expanded global connectivity and awareness, but sparked a fierce debate over national identity. Supporters point to a cultural hybridity, where global and local traditions merge to create new, diverse, artistic and culinary movements. A distinct example of this globalization seen in corporations like McDonald's altering its menu to sell the Muk Aloo Tikki in India, or halal options in the Middle East, respecting the local customs rather than erasing them. Am I a globalization skeptic? I would say no. I'm a hyper globalist. Actually, I believe everything is going to be globalized eventually. On the other hand, critics argue that this trend represents global cultural imperialism, specifically Americanization, which dilutes unique national cultures. The dominance of US media giants, fast food chains, and consumer values can flatten global diversity into a single, uniform Western lifestyle. The rapid rise of Netflix and Hollywood entertainment dominating the international box offices often pushes local media industries to the margins, creating a homogenized global consumer culture. Imagine in some alternate universe. Bro, I'm not reading that out. Guys, who's joining me for my Team 10 revival? Me. Implications for the nation state and national sovereignty. So, globalization advantages versus disadvantages. States increasingly lose control over their domestic economies to international financial markets and mobile capital. If a government raises corporate taxes to fund public services, TNCs can easily relocate factories and capital to low-tax jurisdictions. A clear example is Ireland's low corporate tax rate, long kept at 12.5%, which forced other European nations into a race to the bottom to lower their own tax rates just to stay competitive, undermining their ability to self-govern economically. The rise of supranational organisations requires states to pool their sovereignty, making them subject to laws they did not independently pass. In these arrangements, international or regional bodies hold judicial supremacy over domestic legislation. Read it. You are only here to you are here only to read my chats. No, I'll do whatever I want. Now I've lost what line I was reading. No, I haven't. The most prominent example is the European Union's single market, where members must accept the free movement of people, goods, and services, directly stripping national parliaments of their absolute power to control their own borders. Despite these global pressures, the nation-state remains the primary political actor, holding the ultimate power to reassert its borders and sovereignty. When national interests are threatened, global rules are quickly sidelined by state power. This resilience was starkly demonstrated during during the COVID-19 pandemic, when states unilaterally closed international borders, banned exports of medical supplies, and locked down citizens, proving that the sovereign state is still the ultimate authority in crisis. I'm sorry for the gross noise. I had to blow my nose. Okay. We're fine. Let's move on. Human rights. Globalization has established a global human rights regime backed by international law and non-governmental organizations, NGOs. The digital age ensures that state atrocities can no longer be hidden, allowing the international community to pressure abusive regimes. The International Criminal Court, ICC, global accountability mechanisms enabled the ICC to issue an arrest warrant for Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir. for genocide in Darfur, proving that international law can strip abusive leaders of their sovereign immunity. Um, Addressing and resolving contemporary issues. Oh, we're reading the same line. Whoops. Powerful states can exploit international human rights rhetoric for geopolitical gains, while simultaneously using their veto power or sovereignty to shield themselves and their allies from accountability. Furthermore, TNCs frequently violate human rights without consequence. Sovereign impunity in the UN Security Council. Major powers frequently use their veto rights to block humanitarian intervention, such as Russia and China, vetoing resolutions aimed at investigating war crimes in the Syrian civil war, rendering global human rights frameworks effectively useless. The environment. Globalization facilitates the rapid borderless sharing of green technologies, climate data, and international treaties. It allows developing states to adopt renewable energy sources quickly without having to repeat the fossil fuel-heavy industrial cycles of Western nations. The Paris Climate Agreement 2015, this framework unified nearly every state under a shared global commitment to global warming. A feat made possible only through deep global diplomatic networks and shared scientific cooperation. Where's the... I'm not going to say that. There's no... Alright. Regarding the company that you mentioned, there's not going to be a section on that. However, I suppose you could use that as an example of a company that globalized, as they have, bases in London and Canada and such, and Luxembourg or something. So globalization fundamentally relies on endless economic growth, resource extraction, and global shipping, which directly accelerates ecological collapse. TNCs bypass strict Western environmental regulations by moving their dirtiest operations to countries with weak oversight. The pollution haven hypothesis in Indonesia. Global demand for cheap palm oil has driven massive corporate-led deforestation in Borneo, destroying vital carbon sinks and biodiversity to fuel consumer supply chains in the global north. So I heard you... Let's move on, okay? I'm not... You know what? If I could ban you, I would, the real MUI, okay? Saying inappropriate things for my chat. Poverty. Globalization reduces extreme poverty by integrating developing nations into the global capitalist economy, attracting foreign direct investment (FDI) and creating jobs. Export-led growth allows poorer states to utilize their competitive advantage in labor. Economic liberalization in India and China. Since opening their markets to global trade in the late 20th century, both nations have lifted over 800 million people out of extreme poverty, transforming their economies. Oh, I dropped something on the ground. Okay. Transforming their economies into global manufacturing and technological hubs. Globalization locks developing nations into a subordinate position within the global economy, creating a race to the bottom where sales where states slash wages and worker protection to attract TNCs. Wealth is concentrated in the hands of global elites, widening the gap between the global north and the global south. The fast fashion industry in Bangladesh. While TNCs generate massive profits, local workers face unsafe conditions and exploitation, exemplified by the 2013 Rana Plaza factory collapse, demonstrating that globalized wealth rarely trickles down safely. Can we get some background music? No. The background music that you need is my lovely voice and nothing else. Once again, I'm not reading your comments out. I'm really sorry. Maybe next year. Conflict. According to Dell's theory of conflict prevention, or Golden Arches theory, global economic integration makes war too costly. Complex interdependence ensures that states rely on each other for energy, goods, and finance, meaning military conflict results in mutual economic ruin. The European Union, by pooling coal, steel, and eventually currencies into a single globalized market, former bitter rivals France and Germany became so economically intertwined that war between them is now materially impossible. Um, Globalization does not stop conflict. It shifts into new asymmetric and borderless domains. Free-flowing capital, communications, and open borders make it easier for non-state actors, terrorist networks, and cybercriminals to destabilize sovereign states. The rise of transnational terrorism, for example ISIS, extremist groups use global internet infrastructure and encrypted messaging apps to recruit foreign fighters, coordinate attacks, and secure illicit funding across borders, bypassing traditional state defense systems. I'm really sorry, I'm not reading out your comments in the chat, okay? Alright, we're done with that section, so now we're on to global governance, political and economics. This is the longest one, so just get ready for that. It's gonna be boring. Okay, the United Nations, origins and develop. Oh, I just poured water on myself. Hold on. Okay. Origins and development. San Francisco Conference, 1945. Representatives from 50 allied nations convened to draft the United Nations Charter, creating a global organization to maintain peace and replace the League of Nations. The UN Charter, 1945. In San Francisco, it establishes the legal obligations for member states to maintain international peace and security through sovereign equality, dispute resolution, and the prohibition of force. No, I'm not reading your comments. 50 countries signed the initial charter in June, and in October, Poland signed it, making it 51. We're not done with that section, we are. Evolution. The UN evolved from a Cold War paralysed security collective into a vast global hub. It initially adapted to manage sweeping global decolonisation in the 1950s and 60s, pioneered preventative peacekeeping, and now coordinates complex human development goals. Okay. The United Nations Security Council, UNSC. So, its role under Article 24 of the United Nations Charter, member states confer the primary responsibility for maintaining international peace and security directly to the. Where's the section on? There's no section on that. In maintaining international peace and security directly to the Security Council, it is uniquely empowered under Chapter 7 to enact legally binding resolutions, enforce economic sanctions, and authorize collective military action to counter global threats or acts of aggression. Significance: the UN Security Council is the only global entity authorized under the UN Charter to issue binding resolutions. As I just said, all the other things. This unique enforcement power is tightly controlled by the permanent members, the US, UK, France, Russia, and China, the P5, who can unconditionally veto any substantive action. I think you skipped where. I think let's move on with the video. I'm gonna have to disable the live chat, the rewind after this stream. We're gonna turn it off. Okay, the 1973rd UNSC Resolution 2011 authorized the international community to take all necessary measures to protect civilians during the first Libyan civil war. It effectively sanctioned military intervention, notably Benghazi, from the Gaddafi regime's attacks. So what do you think of the new... shut up. Okay, the resolution passed with 10 votes in favour and 5 abstentions. China, Russia, Brazil, Germany, and India, and ultimately paved the way for the 2011 military intervention in Libya, spearheaded by NATO and a coalition of allied forces. Russia's vetoes regarding Syria 2011 to 2023. No, I don't. You're not going to do that. Do what? I don't even know what I just said. Russia cast its first Syrian veto in October 2011, blocking a resolution that condemned President Bashar al-Assad's violent crackdown on anti-government protesters. It vetoed similar sanction threats and peace plan resolutions twice in 2012. In May of 2014, Russia, alongside China, blocked a major resolution that would have referred the situation in India to the International Criminal Court (ICC) for war crime investigations. Russia exercised its veto twice in late 2016 to block demands for cessation of hostilities, a military no-fly zone, and emergency humanitarian access to the besieged city of Aleppo. I'm vetoing your decision to turn off the live chat. Sorry, you can't. You're not a permanent member. So, yeah, sorry. In 2017 alone, Russia used its veto 5 times to shield the Syrian regime. This included blocking international sanctions over chemical weapon use and ending the mandate of the UN Joint Investigative Mechanism, JIM, probing nerve agent attacks. Russia has also vetoed critical aid renewals between 2019 to 2023. Russia severely complicated the UN cross-border delivery mechanism, leaving millions of vulnerable Syrians in the northwest reliant on dwindling resources. Hashtag fairs. Shut up, bro. We're turning the chat off, and you have no legislation against that. Russian vetoes regarding Ukraine 2015 to 2025. In 2015, commercial flight Malaysia Airlines Flight 17 was shot down in over conflict hit eastern Ukraine by Russian-made missile, killing all 298 people on board. Drafted by Australia, Belgium, Malaysia, the Netherlands and Ukraine, the resolution sought to establish an independent, binding international crime tribunal to prosecute those responsible for downing the plane. 11 countries voted in favour, 3 abstained, China, Angola and Venezuela, and Russia used its solo veto to block the tribunal's creation. Where's the bit on the... what? We're not... In 2022... just 24 hours after Moscow initiated its full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the UNSC voted on a draft resolution co-sponsored by dozens of member states. The UNSC aimed to explicitly deplore Russia's military aggression, demand an immediate halt to its use of force, and order an unconditional withdrawal of all Russian forces from Ukraine's internationally recognized borders. 11 countries voted in favour, 3 abstained, China, India and the United Arab Emirates, and Russia used its veto to strike it down. Later in 2022, following Kremlin ceremonies declaring the annexation of 4 partially occupied regions of Ukraine, I'm not reading those out, I can't pronounce them, a resolution was brought to the floor. The UNSC aimed to declare the Kremlin staged referendums completely illegal, categorised the annexations as a direct threat to international peace. How I did not join that group that you're saying. You're making me lose viewers now. This is ridiculous. To reject any modification of Ukraine's borders, 10 countries voted in favour, 4 abstained, Brazil, China, Gabon and India, and Russia vetoed the measure. During a vote on a brief in 2025 compromise resolution pushed by the United States calling generally for an end to the conflict, Resolution 2774, European allies introduced the key protective amendments S 2025-115 and S 2025-116, backed by the UK, France, Denmark, Greece and Slovenia, aimed to legally reassert Ukraine's can you both stop, okay? I'm not saying, I don't want my videos to get taken down. I'm not gonna say any of the things that you're reading, that you're saying in chat. Aim to legally reassert Ukraine's absolute sovereignty and territorial integrity, ensuring any brokered peace deal would be just and comprehensive under the UN Charter. Despite obtaining the necessary majority of votes to pass, with 9 and 11 votes in favour respectively, Russia vetoed both amendments. The broader US resolution subsequently passed without specific sovereignty language, prompting all European Council states to abstain from the final text. Strengths and weaknesses. The UN Security Council possesses the unique authority to enact binding international resolutions, deploy peacekeepers, and enforce sanctions under Chapter 7 of the UN Charter. However, this authority is often paralysed by the P5 veto, which allows permanent members to unilaterally block actions related to humanitarian crises, war crime investigations, and a direct aggression, such as Russia, as we said before. So, The United Nations General Assembly, UNGA, the role, the main deliberative, policy-making and representative organ where all 193 member states only have one vote. It is the only UN body where all 193 member states have equal representation and a single vote. Significance acts as the Parliament of Nations to debate global issues, though its resolutions are non-binding recommendations. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights 1948, passed by the UN General Assembly at the Palais des Chaillot, in Paris on December 10th, 1948. 48 member states voted in favour, 0 voted against and 8 abstained. Eleanor Roosevelt chaired the drafting committee, which included representatives from diverse legal and cultural backgrounds globally. Articles 1 to 21 cover civil and political rights, for example, prohibition of slavery, freedom of movement and freedom of expression. Articles 22 to 30 cover economic, social and cultural rights, for example, the right to work, the right to education and the right to an adequate standard of living. Jacinda Ardern's baby at the UNGA 2018. New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern made global history by bringing her 3-month-old daughter to the UN General Assembly in New York. This unprecedented moment ignited a worldwide conversation about workplace equality, maternity rights, and the representation of working mothers in high-powered political roles. Frankie the Dinosaur 2021. Frankie the Dinosaur was the star of the United Nations Development Programme campaign launched ahead of the COP26 climate summit. Voiced by actor Jack Black, the CGI dinosaur delivered a viral speech demanding governments stop subsidizing fossil fuels and instead spend those funds on eradicating poverty. The short film made history as the first CGI animated piece shot inside the iconic UN General Assembly Hall in New York. It was translated into dozens of languages, reaching over 1.5 billion people on social media. Fidel Castro's speech 1960. UNGA in New York 1960 was a boiling point of Cold War tensions. Cuban leader Fidel Castro delivered the longest speech in UN history at 4 hours and 29 minutes, while Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev famously pounded his desk in the shoe-banging incident. Castro slammed United States imperialism, defended Cuba's recent revolution, and criticized US political figures. Strengths and weaknesses. The UN General Assembly serves as a truly democratic parliament of nations where all 193 member states hold equal voting power to debate critical global issues, historical human rights milestones, and climate campaigns. However, its primary weakness is that its resolution funding functions as only non-binding recommendations, lacking any direct enforcement mechanism. You're diverting from the truth from talking about CGI dinosaurs. I see through you. No, I'm not. This is what the stream is about. The stream is about global politics evidence, so I'm just talking about that. The Economic and Social Council, ECOSOC, the role it serves as a central platform for coordinating economic, social and environmental policies, driving the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, and managing operational and specialised agencies like the World Bank, IMF and WHO. Do you play Ark Raiders? No? What's that? Whoa, glad to be... Yeah, see? Significance. ECOSOC is the anchor of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Through instruments like the annual High-Level Political Forum, HLPF, it tracks global progress, shares knowledge, expertise, and manages critical UN conferences linked to economic and social development. Creation of UN-AIDS 1994. At the peak of the global HIV/AIDS epidemic, ECOSOC passed a resolution endorsing the creation of a joint co-sponsored UN program to combat the virus. Oh, she doesn't play Ark Raiders. Bro, I don't know what that is. This led to the official launch of the UN-AIDS in 1996. It marked a monumental shift in how the UN coordinates complex cross-sectoral global health crises by merging the efforts of multiple UN agencies under one strategic banner. Establishment of the Humanitarian Affairs Segment 1998. So she doesn't like the burnt peanut then. Oh, um, well, no, I don't. Recognizing that complex emergencies require better alignment between economic development and disaster relief, ECOSOC held its first humanitarian affairs segment, HAS. The event permanently bridged the gap between operational humanitarian workers and political policymakers. It established standard procedures for how the international community responds to natural disasters and complex conflict-driven humanitarian crises. Strengths and weaknesses. The Economic and Social Council serves as a critical coordinator for social development, successfully launching cross-sector initiatives like UNAIDS and building vital political frameworks for humanitarian relief. However, because it oversees an immense web of, of complex specialized agencies, its chief weakness lies in the massive administrative challenge of preventing bureaucratic overlap and directly enforcing compliance across independent global bodies. I'm glad you like the picture. Okay, it's put in there just for you. Roll. Where did you get the pic of my arm? Oh, I didn't know you were so tan, so I don't think those are your arms. The International Court of Justice, ICJ, is the principal judicial organ of the United Nations, settling legal disputes submitted by states and giving advisory opinions, headquartered at the Peace Palace in The Hague. Hague? I don't know if that's how it's pronounced. Significant, it serves as the highest judicial authority on international law between sovereign states. Did you put her in because she... Uh... I'm definitely gonna have to turn the chat off, okay. The Corfu Channel case, United Kingdom versus Albania, 1949. The very first contentious case held by the International Court of Justice, ICJ. It established the fundamental principle of state responsibility, ruling that a state is internationally liable for hazards in its own territorial waters if it knew or should have known about them and failed to warn other states. The case, which stemmed from the British destroyers striking naval mines in the Corfu Strait in 1946, established several enduring political pillars of modern international law. It's The Hague, thank you. Well, whatever, have you been there? Bet not. The court ruled that states cannot knowingly allow their territory or waters to be used in any way that harms the rights of other states. Because the minefield laid so close to the Albanian coast, the ICJ presumed Albania had knowledge of the mine-laying activity and failed to notify international ships. Thus breaching its obligations, the court ordered Albania to pay the United Kingdom substantial compensation for the severe loss of life and heavy damage to its naval vessels. Albania eventually paid the compensation, but only after refusing to do so for nearly 50 years. No, you don't live there, and yes, I am going to turn the chat off, okay? Strengths and weaknesses. The International Court of Justice acts as the highest judicial authority on international law, establishing foundational legal precedents regarding state responsibility and the strict prohibition of foreign military interference. However, its fundamental weakness is its lack of direct enforcement power, which allows powerful sovereign nations to refuse to participate in proceedings or ignore court-ordered reparations for decades. Are we ready for paper 4, guys? 2 more papers and we're done with politics forever. Wait, now that you're here, there was some slides in here for you and you missed them. See, there was this one and there was this one and you missed them, so I hope you enjoy that. Okay, where was I? Oh, I've gone too far forward. Okay. Crisis management and humanitarian intervention. The changing role of NATO. We're talking about NATO now. In 1999, the operational Allied force was a 78-day NATO bombing campaign against the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia. Conducted without explicit UN Security Council authorization, it aimed to halt ethnic cleansing and massive human rights abuses being committed by Serbian forces against Kosovar Albanians. If you turn the chat off, I'll turn you off, buddy. Where's paper 4? Okay, stop talking about paper 4. And I'm gonna turn the chat off. Did you see the other one? It's young friendly, I think. No, too slimy. I'm sorry. I did have one of young friendly, but you missed that. That was ages ago. Okay. I didn't even know what I just read out. Okay, it's fine. In 2011, Operation Unified Protector was the NATO-led military campaign in Libya, authorized by the UN Security Council to enforce a no-fly zone and protect civilians. The 7-month operation successfully stopped Muammar Gaddafi's advancing forces, ultimately paving the way for his overthrow and the regime's collapse. I'm pretty sure paper 4 is called Further Global Politics, so Somalia, India, etc. Well, no, that's all just going to be in this paper. You can talk about Somalia and India if you wish in this one. Why did everyone leave the stream? Okay, so... yeah, there was... Look, I'll literally go back. There was one of Young Friendly. I will go all the way back just to show you. In 1 second. Okay, global. Why did everyone leave? The only invocation of Article 5 in NATO history occurred on the 12th of September 2001, following the 9/11 terrorist attacks against the United States. This triggered a broad range of collective measures, including NATO taking command of the International Security Assistance Force (ISAF) in Australia in August 2003. The ISAF mission formally concluded in 2014, transitioning into the non-combative support mission, which ended in August 2021. Okay, we'll go all the way back now, just because I did put a picture of him in there just for you. Let me just give me 1 second. There we go. There we go. See? You need to do the stream later because that's when people start. Bro, why did... Oh, I've gone way too far forward again. It's fine. Am I going crazy? How many viewers does it say I have? It says I have 1 viewer. So did everyone leave, or is that just a glitch? Do you think George Bush... he probably did. I mean, it's in the name, so... Weaknesses. All NATO policies and military actions require unanimous agreement among member states. Okay, I would have done the stream later, but then I always do it until like midnight, and then everyone stops watching anyway. So perhaps I should have done it at like 8 or so, and that would have been a good time, but it's fine now. This rule can lead to political gridlock or delays. As it says, yeah, it says 2 for me now, but it said 1 when you were there, and I'm also viewing, so it doesn't make sense. Okay, it doesn't matter. This rule, I'm not doing it for the clout, so. This rule can lead to political gridlock or delays, as a single dissenting country can block or leverage the alliance's agenda. Between 2022 to 2024, an example of this dynamic is the delay of Sweden and Finland's accession to NATO, where Turkey and Hungary used the consensus rule to stall the expansion of up to 22 months. Member states often have conflicting geopolitical priorities. For example, the focus on the eastern flank, such as the Baltic states, can differ from the southern flank's priorities regarding migration or terrorism in the Mediterranean. The core principle of collective defence, Article 5, is a powerful deterrent, but also carries the risk of entangling all 32 member nations into a localised conflict sparked by a border dispute or allied involvement. The International Monetary Fund, IMF. Core functions. The IMF acts as the lender of last resort. Monetary #fairs. Okay. Just... Bro. The IMF acts as the lender of last resort, monitoring and stabilising the global financial system by providing short-term loans to countries facing severe balance of payments or debt crises. Financial stabilisation. In late 2022, Ghana faced a catastrophic economic crisis. Overwhelming debt, soaring inflation, and a collapsing currency, the cedi, meant that the nation could no longer pay for vital imports or service its international debts. The International Monetary Fund stepped in with a $3 billion extended credit facility. Zambia became the first African nation to default on its sovereign debt during the COVID-19 pandemic. The IMF stepped in with a $1.7 billion extended credit facility, ECF. This funding was explicitly contingent on Zambia executing massive debt restructuring deals with its international creditors such as France, India, and Saudi Arabia to bring its debt back to a sustainable level. Scarlett Robinson, where is she? She's probably already done or something. Policy surveillance and advice. Under its Article Article 4 of its charters, the IMF sends teams of economists to every member state to annually scrutinise their national balance sheets. In September 2022, the UK government under Liz Truss announced a unbudgeted £45 billion tax-cutting package that triggered massive financial instability in British bond markets. The IMF issued a public, highly critical review condemning the policy, warning it would worsen inequality and fuel inflation. In its subsequent 2023 and 2024 Article 4 on consolation reports, the IMF provided explicit guidance pressuring the UK Treasury to prioritise fiscal discipline, raise interest rates, and carefully rebuild public finances. Computer, how old is nanogenics? What? Imagine an ultimate. What? Shut up! Like, I'm gonna have to turn the chat off. Okay. The United States is the largest economy in the world and does not need to borrow from the IMF. However, under its surveillance mandate, the IMF still sends economists to Washington annually to audit the US Treasury. In its 2024 and 2026 Article 4 consolation reports, the IMF explicitly criticised the USA's surging national debt, expected to exceed 140% of GDP by 2031, and the aggressive deployment of domestic import tariffs, warning that these policies represent a huge risk to the global economy. Resource mobilization. In August 2021, the IMF executed the largest resource mobilization in its history by injecting $650 billion worth of special drawing rights, SDRs. SDRs function as an international reserve asset that vulnerable economies could instantly swap for hard liquid currencies like US dollars or euros. Democratic deficit. The US maintains an absolute unilateral veto over all major IMF decisions. Despite China being the world's second largest economy, its voting share has historically been suppressed. For years, emerging economies pushed for governance reforms to increase their voting shares. The US Congress repeatedly blocked and delayed these changes. Frustrated by this, the Western institutional lock, emerging powers and bypass the system by entirely creating their own rival architectures, such as the BRICS New Development Bank. This explicitly demonstrates the structural power imbalance at the heart of global financial governance. It provides empirical proof that the IMF remains an instrument of Western G7 hegemony rather than a truly democratic, representative global institution. What are you guys talking about? Like, just actually, I don't even know what you're talking about. The World Bank. The World Bank focuses on long-term structural economic development and the reduction of extreme poverty. It finances targeted infrastructure, health, education, and environmental projects. Stabilization packages. The bank approved a massive $415 million education program funded via the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development and specific crisis facilities. The LEARN program, launched in 2024 in Ukraine, entailed upgrading and fortifying schools to protect against ongoing conflict, providing free, safe transportation for vulnerable and displaced students, and printing and distributing new modernized textbooks directly to over 400,000 students. In 2026, the bank injected $94 million to deliver an integrated package linking health services with structural infrastructure under the WASH program for Yemen. Targeted development. The grid-connected rooftop solar program, launched with an initial $625 million World Bank loan channeled through the State Bank of India (SBI) to finance widespread commercial, industrial and institutional rooftop solar installations. It was then later expanded with an additional $165 million in financing to scale up installations specifically for residential households. Stacey with elite ball knowledge at CBK. I don't know. What are you guys talking about? About Bills and Chi and Bulma? Absolute nonsense. So, environmental issues. The World Bank initially approved a $450 million credit package to construct a massive network of hydroelectric dams along the Narmada River in India to generate energy and irrigation. The bank financed the early phases of the project, despite warnings from internal researchers and civil society that governments lacked a coherent plan to manage the vast human and ecological displacement. The resulting reservoirs submerged vast areas of fertile forest land and displaced over 200,000 indigenous tribal people, Adivasis, who were forced off their ancestral lands with minimal compensation or resettlement support. This forced the World Bank to abruptly withdraw its remaining funding in 1993 amid global condemnation. Is it true that one of the predicted questions is to what extent has Gora solved the hunger crisis in Uganda? It is true. Make sure you do an essay plan for that using the evidence in the video. Democratic deficit. Since the founding of the Bretton Woods system in 1944, an unwritten gentleman's agreement dictates that the president of the World Bank is always a US citizen, nominated by the US president, while the head of the IMF is always a European. In 2019, US President Donald Trump appointed David Malpass, a fierce critic of multilateralism who later faced intense global backlash for dodging questions on whether he had accepted climate science. When Malpass resigned early, US President Joe Biden unilaterally selected Ajay Banga, former MasterCard CEO, to lead the bank. Banga took office without a competitive, open election process involving candidates from the Global South. It demonstrates that the World Bank is not an inclusive global body, but rather an instrument of US hegemony that projects Western structural power and capitalist ideology onto developing nations. To what extent did the Z fighters... Shut up! We're going to turn the chat off. How do I turn the chat off? Oh, thank you so much. To a large extent. The stream is great to a huge extent. The WTO, World Trade Organization, is the only global international organization dealing with the rules of trade between nations. It operates on a formal treaty-based system with 166 member states. The WTO Trade Facilitation Agreement, TFA. Before this agreement, global trade was plagued by bureaucratic red tape at customs borders. Countries could arbitrarily change their customs rules, causing shipments to spoil, costs to spike, and global businesses to face extreme financial uncertainty. The WTO negotiated the Trade Facilitation Agreement, TFA, which legally bound all members to digitize, standardize, and streamline their customs procedures. This agreement created a predictable, transparent framework for global supply chains. It slashed global trade costs by an average of 14.3% and proved that our universal rulebook prevents countries from using bureaucratic border delays as hidden protectionist trade barriers. Don't report me, okay? I'm sorry, I won't turn the chat off. Just some people are saying silly things in my chat, especially the real MUI. Consensus deadlock. Decisions require unanimous consensus amongst all 166 members. This has paralysed the WTO, leaving the Doha development round completely stalled since 2001 due to disagreements between developed and developing nations over agricultural subsidies. Disadvantages to developing nations. In October 2020, at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, India and South Africa led to a coalition of over 100 developing nations at the WTO. They formally requested a temporary TRIPS waiver to suspend patent rules. This would allow factories in the Global South to rapidly mass-produce generic, low-cost versions of vaccines and antivirals. Yet many wealthy nations blocked and delayed the waiver for nearly 2 years to protect the profits and intellectual property rights of their domestic pharmaceutical giants. By the time a severely watered-down compromise waiver was finally approved in June 2022, it was restricted to only vaccines and excluded crucial therapeutic drugs and diagnostics. The real MUI, we're not reading out your comments. In fact, if I knew how, I would just ban you, okay? The Group of Seven, the G7 core functions. The G7 is an informal bloc of industrialized, advanced democratic economies Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, and the UK and the US. It was the G8 until Russia was permanently expelled in 2014 following the annexation of Crimea. Evaluate the truth DT equals the Great Dragonstone No! Guys, take the politics seriously. This is a serious subject. Establishment. Originally formed in 1975 to manage the global oil crisis, it has evolved into a steering committee for the Western aligned world to address security, economic stability, and global governance. Its members represent nearly half of global economic output and maintain dominant political influence. The consensus reached at annual summits heavily shapes policies inside major international enforcement bodies like the UN, World Bank, and IMF. Okay, so macroeconomic policy. In response to money laundering and terrorism financing, the G7 created the Financial Action Task Force, FATF. The 2025 Kananaskis Summit focused heavily on securing critical mineral supply chains to insulate members from economic coercion, geopolitical and security crisis management. Following Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the G7 collectively imposed aggressive economic sanctions, froze Russian central bank assets, and engineered a plan to fund Ukrainian reconstruction using the interest generated from those frozen assets. Drawbacks. Lack of enforcement ability, as the G7 is a forum and not a treaty-based international organisation. Its annual communiques and declarations are strictly non-binding. It has no legal mechanism, courts or fines to punish a country that breaks its promises. This results in massive compliance gaps. Gridlock. At the 2025 Kananaskis Summit and the 2026 Evian Summit, US President Donald Trump clashed heavily with allies, left early, threatened universal reciprocal tariffs against G7 partners, and refused to sign a unified statement on climate action. The G20. The Group of 20, the G20. The G20 is the premier forum for international economic cooperation, bringing together 19 of the world's largest countries, the European Union, and the African Union sometimes. Crisis response. During the 2008 I saw that on the news actually. Oh wow. Well done. During the 2008 global financial crisis, G20 leaders coordinated a massive $4 trillion fiscal stimulus package and dramatically tightened global banking standards, Basel III, to prevent a total collapse of the world economy. Environmental development. The G20 was instrumental in launching the Just Energy Transition Partnerships (JETP), a multi-billion-dollar financial scheme that successfully funded the accelerated phase-out of coal-fired power plants in South Africa and Indonesia. Gridlock. Following the escalation of conflicts in Ukraine and the Middle East, the G20 was thrown into deep polarization. At multiple consecutive summits, leaders struggled to even draft a joint declaration because Western nations and the Russia-China bloc fundamentally disagreed on the wording regarding state sovereignty and military aggression. Weak enforcement, as the G20 includes both ambitious, climate-focused European nations and massive fossil fuel-dependent economies like Saudi Arabia, Russia and India. Its climate goals are chronically weak. Agreements frequently resort to ambiguous phrasing, such as pledging to phase out coal rather than phase down coal rather than phase it out. The North-South. Okay, theories and measurements of poverty. The North-South divide. The Brandt Line / Report, 1980. A visual socio-economic and political map division separating the wealthy industrialized nations of the global north from the developing and poorer nations of the global south. As you can see on the map below, highlighted deep geopolitical and economic partition between the developed industrial nations, global north, and developing historically colonized nations, the Global South. The G7 group of nations commands disproportionate voting power in the International Monetary Fund, IMF, and World Bank, demonstrating dominance of the Global North. How successful was the nanogenics wheel bill, and how... bro, shut up! Immanuel Wallerstein's world systems theory divides the global economy into an interconnected hierarchy of core, semi-periphery, and periphery nations. These categories illustrate how wealthy nations exploit poorer ones for cheap labor and raw materials, resulting in unequal exchange. Global electronics supply chain. Companies from core countries such as the USA, Japan, and South Korea focus on the highly profitable stages of the supply chain, including research, design, software development, and marketing. Peripheral nations such as the DR of Congo are often exploited to supply cheap raw materials such as cobalt and lithium, which are extracted by laborers under low wages to feed the production process. Manufacturing and fast fashion. Nations in the semi... I'm so sorry, I need another drink of water. Okay. Come on. Okay. Nations in the semi-periphery exhibit traits of both. Semi-periphery nations include China, Mexico, India, and Vietnam. They possess large-scale manufacturing industries, turning the raw materials from the periphery into finished consumer goods like garments or smartphones. But they often rely on core countries for advanced technology, capital, and consumer markets. Regional hierarchy within the EU. World systems theory is not limited to whole continents. It can be applied to regional trade zones. Within the European Union, economically dominant nations like Germany and France act as the core by exporting high-value industrial and financial services. Conversely, countries that have historically struggled with debt and relied on bailouts, such as Greece, represent the periphery. The dependency theory, popularized by Andre Gunder Frank, it argues that global capitalism actively develops the global south. Wealth flows from poor satellite states to enrich a core of wealthy states. Resource exploitation. Many developing nations are exceptionally rich in natural resources but remain impoverished. For example, countries in sub-Saharan Africa or the Democratic Republic of Congo export raw materials like cobalt, copper, or agricultural commodities at low prices only to buy back expensive finished products processed in wealthier nations. Technological and corporate monopolies. The relationship between Apple and Foxconn, a Taiwanese company, perfectly illustrates dependency theory. Apple acts as a wealthy core, keeping high-value intellectual property and software design while capturing most of the profit. Developing nations serve as a periphery, providing cheap labor for assembly with razor-thin margins. As advanced technology is never transferred, these host countries remain stuck in a dependency trap. These must keep wages low and labor laws weak to prevent Apple from moving production to cheaper regions, leaving their local economies highly vulnerable. Oh, that was gross, sorry. Okay. Orthodox measures of poverty. The World Bank's measure of absolute poverty. The World Bank's measure of absolute poverty is an international threshold of $3 per person per day. Gross national income, GNI. This measures a country's total income earned by its citizens and businesses divided by the population. Bro, you guys, you're not even paying attention. You're just coming up with fake questions about whatever it's was. Piotr got annoyed at me last time I got it wrong. DVL, I think. This measures a country's total income earned by its citizens and businesses divided by the population. The World Bank uses it to officially categorize countries into strict low-income or high-income groups to decide who qualifies for financial aid. Gross domestic product, GDP per capita. This tracks the total economic output produced inside a nation's borders per person, adjusted for the local cost of living. Alternative measures of poverty. The Human Development Index, HDI, formulated by the UN Development Programme, UNDP. The HDI measures life expectancy, literacy, and standard of living alongside GDP. Global Multidimensional Poverty Index, MPI, this alternative tool measures. Have I said it wrong? Oh no. Whoops. This alternative tool measures poverty by. Oh. Oh, I've said something wrong. I'm sorry. Uh. No. By tracking overlapping non-financial deprivations in health, education, and basic living standards. It is used by the UN to show that traditional GDP growth often masks severe daily hardship. Are you serious? This is what you're talking about. Proving that people can remain deeply impoverished even in nations classified as economically growing. Oh, come on, someone's left the stream now because of you guys being silly. Classical economic development theory, driven by the invisible hand of free market capitalism, division of labour, and absolute minimal state intervention, laissez-faire, Bitcoin. The foundation of the World Trade Organization, WTO, which mandates the reduction of trade barriers, tariffs, and protectionist quotas globally. Structural theory argues that global market structures naturally penalize developing states, require state intervention to protect domestic infant industries, import substitution industrialization, ISI, used historically by Latin American nations, or the UN Conference on Trade and Development, UNCTAD, which advocates for preferential trade terms for poorer states. Neoclassical development theory, re-emerged in the 1980s via the Washington Consensus, argues that poverty is caused by state corruption and inefficiency, commands deregulation and privatization. IMF conditionalities to receive financial bailouts. Countries like Argentina or Pakistan are forced to privatize state assets, cut public spending, and open markets to foreign multinationals. We're predicting questions, okay? I'm sorry. You continue predicting questions then, I suppose. Non-governmental organisations, NGOs, human rights NGOs. Amnesty International, their role is monitoring abuses, mobilising global public opinion, and lobbying states to alter national legislation. You don't know about the Z Fighters cabinet. No, I don't. I'm sorry. In 1977, when Amnesty International began its dedicated campaign, only 16 countries had abolished capital punishment. Through decades of public shaming, legal reports, and grassroots letter-writing campaigns, over 110 countries have completely abolished it. Friends of the Earth, FOE, operating as a massive international, this is environmental NGOs, operating as a massive international network across dozens of countries. Friends of the Earth focuses on intersectional environmental justice. They combine local community organizing with national policy advocacy to fight corporate dominance and pollution. During 2024, in a major victory for biodiversity, FOE's US branch successfully pressured New York into passing the Birds and the Bees Protection Act, making it the first US state to ban non-toxic, I can't pronounce that, treated seeds. In 2024, by organising localised consumer campaigns, they successfully convinced over 80 major grocery retailers to reject genetically engineered salmon, forcing the primary biotech producer to stop production. Oxfam, founded in 1942 as the Oxford Committee for Famine Relief, Oxfam operates as a global confederation. They combine immediate emergency disaster relief with highly vocal public campaigning against the root structural causes of global inequality. In the last financial year alone, Oxfam directly supported 9.2 million people facing acute humanitarian emergencies, deploying life-saving food, clean water and shelter in active crisis zones, including Ukraine, Gaza, Yemen, and drought-afflicted East Africa. Oxfam's pioneering Unblocked Cash project in Vanuatu utilised a decentralised digital ledger and near-field communication (NFC) cards. This system enabled direct instantaneous financial assistance to disaster survivors. By eliminating traditional banking intermediaries, it significantly reduced delivery costs and sped up emergency relief. Médecins Sans Frontières. Founded in 1971 by French doctors and journalists, MSF provides urgent medical care in the middle of active wars, disease outbreaks, and natural disasters. Over 90% of their money comes from private individual donors, deliberately avoiding government funding so that they can cross border and treat patients without political interference. MSF operates in over 70 countries, delivering an average of 16 million medical consultations annually. They build impromptu field hospitals, conduct emergency surgeries, and establish neonatal care clinics in highly volatile areas like the Democratic Republic of Congo and South Sudan. MSF's charter mandates that they do not just treat patients, but also publicly denounce war crimes and human rights violations. They witnessed firsthand a principle that won them the Nobel Peace Prize in 1999. Okay, we're done with that section. Great. How's everyone feeling? Okay, global governance, human rights, and environmental. The International Court of Justice, ICJ, international laws and institutions. Australia versus Japan 2014. The ICJ ordered Japan to revoke whaling permits, demonstrating its power to regulate state actions under international treaties. Japan cancelled the JAPA II program immediately after the judgment. However, Japan later redesigned its research quotas, eventually withdrawing from the International Whaling Commission, IWC, to resume commercial whaling in its own territorial waters. Gambia do the Blue Boys have any limits in 2026? Gambia versus Myanmar 2019 to 2026. Who is this? What are you guys talking about? Goresh, what's that? Gambia versus Myanmar 2019-2026. Filed in 2019, the ICJ ordered Myanmar to take provisional members to preserve genocidal acts against the Rohingya, showing its role in human rights preservation. In 2020, the ICJ unanimously ordered binding provisional measures requiring Myanmar to prevent genocidal acts, preserve evidence, and report on compliance. In 2022, the court dismissed Myanmar's preliminary objections, ruling that it has jurisdiction under the Genocide Convention. Currently, the Gambia is demanding full reparations, including the guarantee of safe return and full equal citizenship for displaced Rohingya. Myanmar has asked the court to fully reject all remedy claims as legally baseless. Guys, who is Goresh? Can someone let me know? The prosecutor versus Thomas Lubanga Diallo, 2012. On March 14, 2012, the ICC convicted the Congolese warlord and founder of the Union of Congolese Patriots for his role in orchestrating the abduction and use of children as soldiers in the Ituri region of the Democratic. Short answer, no. Okay, wow. I see how it is. We're going to turn the chat off now. Of the Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC, during 2002 and 2003. Wait, I can just delete your message. Anyways, on July 10th, 2012, Lubanga was officially sentenced to a total of 14 years of imprisonment because he had already been in ICC custody since his arrest in 2006. His sentence required him to serve a further 8 years in jail. Now that I found out I can delete messages, the real MUI, all of your previous messages earlier in the stream are going to be deleted, alright? So, following the confirmation of his sentence by appeals chamber, Lubanga was transferred to a prison facility in the DRC in December 2015. He served out his sentence and was released in 2020. Special UN tribunals. The International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia found both Bosnian Serb political leader Radovan I can't pronounce that, I'm sorry, and military commander Radko, I can't pronounce that, guilty of genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes for the July 1995 massacre of over 8,000 Bosniak men and boys in that word that I can't pronounce. Randovan was initially sentenced to 40 years imprisonment in 2016 by the ICTY. His sentence was increased to life imprisonment by the appeals chamber in 2019. Goresh is pretty much the president of Dragon Ball Legends Chrono Crystal Market Economy. Okay, thank you for letting me know. Ratko was sentenced to life imprisonment in 2017. His final appeal against the conviction was rejected by the IRMCT in 2021. Very relevant in 2026, and for anyone watching, he's a relevant example in paper 3 can be. I'm sure he is. In fact, I'll have to make a whole new slide just for him. Okay. Sorry. The International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda (ICTR) achieved the world's first conviction for genocide, Jean-Paul Akayesu, 1998, and legally defined sexual violence as an act of genocide. The European Court of Human Rights, ECHR, Hurst versus United Kingdom, 2005. So this example has been used across both of the papers, and you can use it again. Yay! The ECHR ruled that the UK's blanket ban on prisoner voting violated the European Convention on Human Rights, sparking fierce domestic political debate over state sovereignty. But you could also argue that this doesn't really show a real power of the European Court of Human Rights, because the UK mostly ignored this ruling and didn't make vast legislation to change it. Abu Qatada versus United Kingdom, 2012. The court blocked the UK from deporting a radical cleric to Jordan because evidence obtained under torture might be used against him, forcing the UK to secure specific diplomatic guarantees first. Vinter and others versus United Kingdom, 2013. The court ruled that the whole life prison sentences without the possibility of review violated Article 3, inhuman or degrading treatment, prompting changes to UK judicial review processes. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, UDHR, adopted by the UN in 1948 in response to the atrocities of World War II, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, UDHR, established the first global benchmark for fundamental human rights. UN Convention on the Status of Refugees, 1951, this binding international treaty directly operationalized Article 14 of the UDHR, which guarantees the right to seek asylum from persecution. The South African Constitution, 1996, post-apartheid South Africa explicitly used the UDHR as a structural blueprint for its domestic Bill of Rights. The Magnitsky Acts. In 2012, the US Congress passed the Sergei Magnitsky Rule of Law Accountability Act. It explicitly targeted the Russian officials responsible for the 2009 torture and prison death of Russian whistleblower and tax accountant Sergei Magnitsky. In 2016, the US passed the Global Magnitsky Human Rights Accountability Act. This pivotal expansion shifted the focus from just Russia to any foreign national or government official responsible for gross human rights violations and corruption worldwide. The UK introduced its equivalent powers via the Sanctions and Anti-Money Laundering Act 2018. Following Brexit, the UK government officially activated these autonomous powers by launching the Global Human Rights Sanctions Regulations in July 2020, freezing assets and issuing travel bans to 49 individuals from countries like Russia, Saudi Arabia, and Myanmar. Western double standards, that's what we're going to be talking about now. So this will be a really good section for Hoggy and the real MUI, who were criticising me earlier. Okay. For its first 2 decades, the ICC exclusively indicted African leaders, for example, in Sudan, Uganda, Kenya, and the DR of Congo. In 2016, South Africa and Burundi threatened to withdraw from the Rome Statute, accusing the ICC of being an instrument of Western regime change that ignored Western war crimes and had a large bias towards convicting Africans. The ICC issued an arrest warrant for Russian President Vladimir Putin in 2023 with a year of invasion of Ukraine, a move heavily praised by the US and UK. However, when the ICC prosecutor issued arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant in late 2024 over actions in Gaza, the US called warrants outrageous. Critics argued that this exposes a double standard, punishing a Western adversary, Russia, while attempting to shield a Western ally, Israel. The US is not a member of the ICC. It has an actual domestic law informally called the Hague Invasion Act that authorizes the use of military force to free any American soldier detained by the ICC, showcasing a powerful Western state completely exempting itself from global accountability. I wasn't criticizing you, I'm deeply offended. Well, you were to an extent. Oh, what have I done? Whoopsies. Am I on the right page? No. Okay, here. The ICJ. In 1986, the ICJ ruled that the United States had violated international law by supporting the Contra rebels against the government of Nicaragua. The US simply refused to recognize the court's... I don't even know what you're saying. The US simply refused to recognize the court's jurisdiction, blocked the enforcement of the judgment in the UN Security Council, and withdrew its compliance. The ICJ relies on the UN Security Council to enforce its judgments. Western permanent members, US, UK, France, can use their veto power to protect themselves or their allies. For example, the US has routinely used its veto to shield Israel from resolutions enforcing ICJ advisory opinions regarding its occupied territory. Special UN tribunals. Critics point out that the ICTY flatly refused to investigate allegations of NATO war crimes during the 1999 bombing of Yugoslavia, such as the bombing of the state TV station and passenger train. No special UN tribunals have ever been set up to investigate allegations of torture or unlawful killings committed by US or UK forces during the invasions of Iraq or Afghanistan. Well, to JDJ's comment, perhaps I agree. The ECHR. Critics argue that the ECHR has historically been reluctant to apply human rights protections to victims of European military operations outside of Europe. For example, it took extensive legal battles for Iraqi civilians to hold British soldiers accountable under the ECHR for abuses committed during the Iraq War. For example, Al-Ghani versus United Kingdom. The United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. The UNFCCC is an international treaty adopted in 1992 at the Rio Earth Summit. Its primary significance is that it provides the foundational, legal and institutional framework for all modern global climate negotiations. The Kyoto Protocol 1997, the first major legally binding agreement under the UNFCCC, it set binding emission reduction targets for developed nations. However, it highlighted the North-South divide as major developing emitters like China were exempt, and the US refused to ratify it, showing the limits of global compliance. The Paris Agreement 2015. Okay. I'm really sorry. Okay. The UNFCCC Accord, where 196 parties committed to limiting global warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius, ideally 1.5 degrees Celsius. It shifted the strategy from rigid top-down targets to voluntary, nationally determined contributions, NDCs, reflecting a compromise between liberal collective action and realist state sovereignty. The COP28 UAE Consensus 2023. For the first time in UNFCCC history, the final text explicitly called on countries to transition away from fossil fuels in energy systems. This demonstrated the UNFCCC's unique role as the only global forum capable of extracting universal rhetorical commitments at the end of the oil era. The Baku Finance Goal at COP29 2024, a major consensus agreement was reached in late 2024 that established the Baku Finance Goal. This deal requires developed countries to lead a global effort to mobilize at least $300 billion annually by 2035 for climate finance to developing nations, showcasing the UNFCCC's role in addressing global economic divides. Yes, back in 2023, I would have BZVB and said good game. And okay. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change (IPCC), created in 1988 by the World Meteorological Organization (WMO). Can you guys? Whoa, let's keep it calm in the chat, guys. Please, just pay attention to the stream and everyone be nice to each other. Okay. And the UN Environment Programme (UNEP). The IPCC does not conduct its own research, instead its significance lies in synthesizing thousands of peer-reviewed scientific studies to create the definitive epistemic consensus, a scientific authority that drives global policy. The Sixth Assessment Report 2021 to 2023, the IPCC declared that it is unequivocal that human influence has warmed the atmosphere, ocean, and land. This unequivocal language stripped away political deniability for states, directly forcing the 1.5-degree target to remain the focal point of all subsequent UNFCCC COP summits. The Specialist Report on Global Warming of 1.5 degrees Celsius 2018, this highly influential report calculated that the world only had a few years left to drastically cut emissions to avoid catastrophic tipping points. This specific report acted as the scientific catalyst that triggered the global wave of net zero by 2050 legislative commitments by the UK, EU, and other major economies. And okay, now we're on shallow green ecology versus deep green ecology. So we're on shallow green ecology, anthropocentric, human-centered view that nature has an instrumental value for human survival. The EU's Net Zero Industry Act 2024, a foundational EU legislative framework designed to scale up domestic manufacturing of clean energy technologies, introduced as a part of the European Green Deal industrial plan. It aims to meet at least greater than or equal to 40% of the EU's annual clean tech deployment needs through local manufacturing by 2030. Right, can we get Nathan out of the street? The EU Emissions Trading System (ETS) is undergoing its most significant expansion to date, broadening its scope beyond heavy industry and power sectors to include maritime shipping, road transport, and buildings. The overarching cap tightens to reduce emissions by 62% by 2030 compared to 2005 levels. Deep green ecology, ecocentric, nature-centered view that all living things have equal intrinsic value. It argues that the capitalist drive for endless economic growth is still the root cause of the crisis, demanding a total overhaul of global economic and social systems. Whoa, can we, guys, chill out? Bolivia's Law of the Rights of Mother Earth 2010, a landmark piece of legislation passed in December 2010 that legally recognized nature as a collective subject of public interest with its own inherent rights, grounded in the indigenous Andean cosmovision of Pachamama Mother Earth, it treats the natural world not merely as human property, but as a living system to be respected and protected. Reintroduction of grey wolves into Yellowstone National Park 1995, reintroducing keystone species to restore natural balance, relies on the deep ecological belief that non-human species have a right to exist and thrive independent of human utility. The reintroduction of grey wolves to Yellowstone National Park reversed ecosystem degradation, allowing vegetation to recover and local rivers to stabilize. Sustainable development, the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, UN Sustainable Development Goal 13, climate action, drives global efforts to combat climate change by integrating climate measures into national policies and scaling up green financing. It promotes economic expansion alongside a renewable energy transition by creating new jobs in clean tech, boosting infrastructure investment, and preventing the severe financial losses caused by extreme weather. Ultimately, the goal aims to build global climate resilience and transition economies towards net zero emissions without halting economic growth. Tragedy of the commons, a concept stating that in a shared, unregulated resource system, the commons, like oceans or atmosphere, individual states will act independently in their own self-interest, ultimately depleting and destroying the resource for everyone. Overfishing in the South China Sea, where competing nations exhaust fish stocks because no single country owns the waters. Or the historical failure of the states to curb CO2 emissions because the atmosphere is a shared global common. The Grand Banks cod fishery, located off the coast of Newfoundland, Canada, this area was historically renowned for endless cod supplies. However, during the 1960s and 1970s, new industrial fishing technologies allowed international fleets to extract massive quantities of fish. Driven by short-term profits, they overfished in the area, causing the complete collapse of the cod population in 1992 and triggering a severe economic ecosystem and industry crisis. Deforestation in the Amazon. Driven by the global demand for land, timber and cattle, the continued clearing of the Amazon rainforest acts as a tragedy of the commons. Individual logging and agricultural operations harvest these lands for immediate financial gain, contributing to devastating global biodiversity loss and accelerating climate change. International agreements, strengths and weaknesses. The Rio Earth Summit 1992, created by the UNFCCC, cementing climate change on the global political agenda and establishing the precautionary principle. Set entirely voluntary targets with no enforcement mechanisms, it lacked legally binding emission cuts. Kyoto Protocol 1997 introduced the first legally binding emission target for industrialized nations and created market-based flexibility tools like carbon trading, excluded major developing polluters like China and India, and the US refused to ratify it, severely undermining its global impact. Copenhagen Accord 2009, for the first time, both developed and major developing nations mutually recognized the scientific need to cap global temperature rises at 2 degrees Celsius. Widely viewed as a diplomatic failure because it was a non-binding political accord drafted by a small group of countries lacking clear timelines or global consensus. Paris Agreement 2015 achieved near universal global consensus, 196 parties, to target a 1.5 degrees Celsius limit, utilizing flexible bottom-up system of nationally determined contributions, NDCs. NDCs are completely voluntary with no legal or financial penalties for states that miss their climate targets, making enforcement impossible. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to do that. Whoops. Okay, sorry. The US withdrawal from the Paris Agreement. Realists argue that global environmental governance is permanently crippled because sovereign states prioritize national economic self-interest and domestic energy security over political commitments. The United States officially exited the Paris Climate Agreement for the second time on the 27th of January 2026, President Donald Trump initiated his second withdrawal by signing an executive order on the 20th of January 2025, his first day back in office. Because the agreement dictates a mandatory one-year waiting period following a formal notification, the exit became legally binding exactly 1 year later. The Baku Finance Gold Tensions, COP29. Developing countries, Global South, argue that developed countries in the Global North achieved well through industrialization and should bear the financial burden, whereas developing states need fossil fuels to lift their populations out of poverty. The intense tension of the implementation of the Baku Finance Goal, COP29, where developing nations initially demanded over $1 trillion annually, but wealthy nations aggressively negotiated the baseline down to $300 billion by 2035. China and India's intervention in COP26 2021. States heavily dispute whether responsibility should be calculated using historically cumulative emissions, blaming the West, or current annual emissions, blaming China and India, alongside arguments over to how to accurately measure and verify carbon offset schemes. China and India's intervention at COP26 2021, where they successfully forced a last-minute textual change from phasing out coal to phasing down coal, arguing that their current developmental responsibilities differed fundamentally from Western nations. Okay, power and development. Different types of power. Hard power, the coercive use of military and economic power to achieve chosen outcomes by forcing compliance. Russian intervention in the Syrian civil war 2015, the Russian Air Force bombed rebel territory, Russian troops and the mercenary Wagner Group were also deployed to defeat anti-government forces. The ruthlessness of Russia's military intervention in Syria, including the sustained bombardment of the rebel-held Aleppo, was crucial to enabling the Assad regime to maintain its power. Different types of power. Hard power. Are we still talking about hard power? Yeah, sorry. US tariffs on China 2018 to 2021. The 2018 Trump administration introduced a 25% tariff on exports from China. China then responded with its own 25% tariff on exports from the USA, using tariffs as an economic hard power that provokes trade wars. In 2021, the US-China Business Council estimates that China's retaliatory tariffs had led to the loss of 245,000 American jobs. The Iraq War 2003, a prime example of direct military hard power, the United States and the United Kingdom deployed overwhelming military force to invade Iraq and depose Saddam Hussein, actively compelling regime change. Sanctions on Iran 2026, following a major escalation in early 2026 that saw a US naval blockade and Iran imposing a toll system in the Strait of Hormuz, I don't know how you say it, sorry. The EU slapped fresh sanctions on Iranian naval commanders and entities obstructing maritime freedom. Soft power, the use of persuasion and negotiation to achieve desired outcomes through the exercise of cultural attraction. International sporting events. The opening ceremony of the 2012 Olympics enabled the UK to present a powerful image of tradition and multiculturalism. Similarly, the Commonwealth Games provide a regular opportunity for members to recommit to the shared values of the Commonwealth through the shared fellowship of sport. The World Cup is also a brilliant opportunity for states to assert soft power, thereby providing the opportunity for host and guest nations to assert their soft power through international sporting events. Vaccine diplomacy. During the COVID-19 pandemic, leading world powers frequently donated vaccines to enhance their soft power influence. In 2022, it was estimated that China had exported vaccines to 102 countries, representing 476.8 million dosages. The aim was to divert attention from the first known COVID-19 outbreak occurred in Wuhan, China. This allowed China to move from 8th place in 2021 to 4th place in 2022 on the Global Soft Power Index. Scholarships. Since 1946, the Fulbright Scholarship has enabled thousands of foreign students to study in the USA. 41 students have served as heads of state or government in their home countries. The Rhodes Scholarship 1902 enables foreign students to study at the University of Oxford. Recipients of the Rhodes Scholarship include Bill Clinton and Pete Buttigieg. Um, Great powers, states that have power and influence on a global scale. So this includes the United Kingdom, wields massive global soft power, maintains a globally deployable military, and possesses significant diplomatic leverage as a permanent member of the UN Security Council. France, the leading military power in the European Union. It holds permanent status on the UN Security Council and maintains a substantial strategic reach. Germany, as Europe's largest economy, it serves as the primary economic and political driver on the continent, though its power projection is largely diplomatic rather than heavily militarized. Japan possesses one of the world's largest economies, high-tech infrastructure, and a highly capable self-defense force that is increasingly deepening global security partnerships. The USA as a declining superpower. A superpower is a state that can project its military, economic, and diplomatic power globally. According to W.T.R. Fox's definition, 1944, a superpower possesses great power plus great mobility of power. Although its hegemonic status is being challenged, the USA is considered a superpower. The US economic dominance challenged by China. 6 of the top 20 most valuable global brands are Chinese 2023, IBC 7th, TikTok 10th, China Construction Bank 12th, State Grid 15th, Agricultural Bank of China 17th, and WeChat 20th. Estimates suggest that this is reflective of China having a bigger GDP than the USA by 2035. The world's largest economy. Despite predictions suggesting that China's GDP will overtake the USA's, the USA remains the world's largest economy, continuing to dominate institutions of global economic governance, such as the IMF and the World Bank. Similarly, the dollar is still the world's main reserve currency. Whilst China did hold a lot of global spots on the top 20 most valuable global brands list in 2023, the top 5 most valuable brands of that list were American. Amazon at first, Apple at second, Google at third, Microsoft at fourth, and Walmart at fifth. Military issues. Under President Obama and President Trump, the USA was resistant to committing military to new conflicts. The USA did not want to commit any ground troops in the Syrian civil war. When Russia annexed Crimea in 2014, there were limited US sanctions and no military response. President Trump's quarrels with other NATO countries over their relative contributions suggest further US withdrawal from global military leadership. Military power. US military power and outreach is unrivaled. In December 2022, the Senate passed a bill authorizing a record $858 billion on military spending. With over 800 existing military bases, USA is the leading power in NATO and overall the most powerful military alliance in the world. US alliances include AUKUS, which is Australia UK-US Security Pact 2020. The US has 11 nuclear-powered aircraft carriers. Damaged US culture. The global appeal of US culture has been significantly damaged by the war on terror and the Trump presidency. In 2019, President Putin claimed that liberalism is dead. Soft power influence. In 2022, the USA was on top of the world. On top of the world for soft power influence. Its cultural outreach, supported by global dominance of Hollywood, valued at $95.45 billion in 2022. Additionally, Russia and China do not offer a more attractive global ideology than liberalism, despite their critiques. Emerging powers. A power that is rapidly achieving the characteristics of a great power. As it achieves more of the characteristics, it will increasingly challenge the regional and global balance of power. BRICS, coined in 2001 by Goldman Sachs economist Jim O'Neill, defining Brazil, Russia, India, and China as fast emerging powers whose growing influence is increasingly would increasingly challenge the global balance of power. Subsequently, in the early 2000s, the BRIC countries began to meet regularly, and in 2010, South Africa was formally recognised as part of the group. In 2014, the BRICS established a new development bank. Algeria, Argentina, and Iran have applied to join the BRICS. Yet, South Africa's appalling record on crime and corruption diminishes its potential for emerging status. Furthermore, in 2023, Nigeria had a larger economy than South Africa. Mint. In 2014, another acronym arose to categorize Mexico, Indonesia, Nigeria, and Turkey as emerging powers. Unlike BRICS, however, Mint countries do not meet, and the term simply denotes emerging countries with strong investment opportunities. Well, I didn't know you could delete messages. It says message retracted. What did you say? Bipolarity, a distribution of power in which two rival superpowers challenge each other for world influence. The Cold War, 1947 to 1991. This type of power distribution characterized the Cold War, when the USA and the Soviet Union competed for global influence. Realist political scientists like John Mearsheimer regard bipolarity as the most stable form of power distribution. The Cuban Missile Crisis, 1962. The Cuban Missile Crisis demonstrates how bipolar rivalry could have provoked nuclear war, leading to the then US Secretary of Defense, Robert McNamara, to remark, "Cold War, hello as a hot war." Each side also fought the other in proxy wars across the world in Korea, Vietnam, Africa, and South America, further suggesting that the Cold War was not in fact a period of global peace and stability. Multipolarity, a distribution of power in global politics in which a number of states compete for influence. USA's eroded hegemonic status. According to some political scientists, the USA's claim to hegemonic status has already been so eroded that we now have entered another period of multipolarity, with emerging powers like China, Iran, India, and the EU challenging for regional and world influence. Post-Napoleonic wars, multipolarity can potentially encourage stability. After the Napoleonic Wars, the great powers met at the Congress of Vienna 1814 to 1815 and established a Congress system to preserve European peace. This is a wonderful stream, by the way. Wow, thank you so much. Anyways, moving on. Unipolarity. Unipolarity is a distribution of power in international relations where one single nation-state, a hegemon, holds the vast majority of economic, military, and cultural influence. Okay, I'm not going to read all that because we've mentioned it previously, but just know that you can use all this evidence for the USA as a unipolar power. Democratic states, a state with a government that is elected freely and fairly, where there are checks and balances on executive power and peaceful transition of power between governments. Norway, often ranked as the most robust democracy in the world, it earns near perfect marks for its electoral process, civil liberties, and political participation. New Zealand, thank you for making politics great again, you're so welcome. The highest ranked non-Nordic country, frequently sitting securely in second place globally, it's highly praised for its open electoral process, absence of corruption, and perfect liberty scores. Iceland, consistently placed in the global top 3 or 4, it boasts excellent civil liberties and strong active tradition of public political participation. The United Kingdom, the UK is recognised globally as a full democracy, though it typically ranks in the lower half of that tier, around 17th or 18th place. Semi-democratic states, a state where some features of democracy, but significant weaknesses. Turkey, where civil liberties have been significantly eroded since the failed military coup in 2016. Also under President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the state has witnessed severe crackdowns on political opposition, journalists, and civil society. The government exercises heavy influence over both the judiciary and mainstream media outlets. South Africa. South Africa exhibits semi-democratic vulnerabilities. The long-dominant African National Congress, ANC, has historically faced intense criticism for using state resources to preserve its political supremacy amidst deep-seated corruption. Why are you sending $1 million? Non-democratic states, a state without any of the characteristics of a democratic state. Non-democratic states are often autocratic, which is a state with an unaccountable government which exerts complete control over its citizens and provides no protection for human rights. Did you put them in the slide? Well, why? Who are they? I don't know who this is, so I didn't put them in the slide. Oh no, okay, I get the joke now. Okay, yeah, sorry. I suppose I put them in the slide. Saudi Arabia, an absolute monarchy governed by the House of Saud, where the king serves as both the head of state and the head of government. The state is widely classified as authoritarian. Citizens have no voting power to select their leaders, and no national level or officials are elected. The government heavily criminalizes dissent and enforces pervasive surveillance, leaving freedom of expression, association, and religion highly suppressed. China, all political opposition is illegal. While there are 8 minor legal political parties, they are completely subordinate to the CCP. This is ultimate decision-making power lies within the CCP, not the legislature. The removal of presidential term limits has cemented Xi Jinping's position as the most powerful Chinese leader in decades. Myanmar is a non-democratic ruled state ruled by a military junta, the Tatmadaw. Following a coup, the military suspended civilian rule, criminalized political dissent, and established control through violent repression and a civil war. Failed states, a state with no government able to exercise power and control over the territory, often in a state of conflict and instability with numerous groups competing for power. So we have Somalia. Somalia is historically considered a failed state following the collapse of Siad Barre's regime in 1991. Decades of civil war, clan fragmentation, and armed insurgency severely weakened governance. Militant group Al-Shabaab holds many bases. Libya, following the 2011 ousting of Muammar Gaddafi, pervasive militia control, and deeply fractured political landscape that has repeatedly escalated into civil war. What do you think of the CCP? It's not the... What? See, look, you're just criticising everything I say. Hoggy, let's just get you banned from the stream. Syria, following the dramatic collapse of the Bashar al-Assad regime, Syria has devolved into a stark example of a failed state. The country is characterized by an inability to provide basic security, a devastated economy, fractured territorial control, and heavy external intervention. Also, Hoggy, you're criticizing how I say things. Say the thorough philanthropist went to the extreme lengths of thinking to thaw the thankful therapist. See? Look, you probably couldn't say that, okay? Anyways, so the rogue state's a state that commits systematic human rights abuses, does not obey international law, and threatens other nation states. Why are you leaving the stream? See, look, if you're going to dish out, insults to me, you have to be able to take it. Okay, Princess Larissa, play Yara Yara or Tiki Tiki Funk in the background. No! North Korea, horrific record on human rights, and has explicitly threatened its neighbours with its illegal nuclear program. Iran, brutal suppression of human rights, and its support for the terrorist groups Hezbollah, Hamas, and Islamic Jihad. Similarly, it has supplied Russia with Shahed military drones for its war on Ukraine. Russia, some regard Russia as a rogue state due to the Russia-Ukraine War 2022, Estonian cyber attack 2007, and the Salisbury poisoning 2018. Liberal economies. Liberal economies focus on free markets, deregulation, privatization. Hello, welcome to the stream. Deregulation, privatization, and the reduction of state intervention. The Washington Consensus. The International Monetary Fund, IMF, and World Bank conditioned financial loans to developing nations, especially in Latin America and Africa, on adopting free market policies such as lowering tariffs and privatizing state industries. Thatcherism and Reaganism. In the 1980s, UK Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher and US President Ronald Reagan pioneered the domestic development of modern neoliberalism. They aggressively privatised state-owned utilities like the British Telecom and British Gas, deregulated financial markets, the 1986 Big Bang in London, and weakened trade unions. Rule of law. The rule of law ensures that all laws apply equally to all citizens. No one is above the law, and the judiciary remains independent of political influence. The Human Rights Act 1998. What do you think of clavicular rhinoplasty? Oh, it's very bad. We have to wait for the swelling to go down, but right now it's not looking good. He didn't need a rhinoplasty, so it's a bit silly to do so. It allows citizens to challenge the actions of the state and the government in domestic courts if their rights are breached. The European. Can I use some of this in in my computer science test? I don't believe so, but you could always give it a go. Maybe something about cyber attacks you could mention. I don't really know. European Union Hoggy should be able to recommend to you, and so should the real MUI as computer science students. The European Union accession criteria, Copenhagen criteria. To join the EU, candidates must prove that they have stable institutions guaranteeing the rule of law. Countries like Poland and Hungary have faced legal and financial sanctions from the EU over concerns regarding government interference with their independent judiciaries. He wanted a nose like mine. His nose doesn't look like yours, so. Democracy involves regular, free, and fair elections, peaceful transitions of power, and protected political freedoms. The third wave of democratization, late 20th century, this concept coined by Samuel Huntington, illustrates the massive spread of democracy. Examples include the fall of right-wing military dictatorships in southern Europe, Portugal, Spain, Greece. In the 1970s, the collapse of communist regimes in Eastern Europe, 1989, and the end of apartheid in South Africa, 1994. The Arab Spring, 2010 to 2011. A wave of pro-democracy. Oh, there we go. We've got to the point in the stream where my headphones die. So, oh, welcome another person in the stream. What is your profile picture? Anyways, can you guys still hear me? Oh, comment. I don't know. Comment anything if you can still hear me, please. Democracy involves. Wait, I already read that. Whoops. A wave of pro-democracy protests across the Middle East and North Africa, while Tunisia successfully transitioned to a democracy. Other nations like Syria and Libya. That's a good one. Okay. The UK electoral system and devolution, 1997 to 2026. The creation of the Scottish Parliament, Welsh Senate, and Northern Ireland Assembly represents the deliberate development and decentralisation of democratic power within a mature liberal democracy. My I'm hello. Hello? Can you guys hear me? Hello, hello. Let me know. You're gonna fail now. No, you're not. You're not gonna fail now. Just everyone stay in the stream. Am I actually muted? Is my mic actually gone? Because on my computer it says that the mic is still working. I'm a bit confused here. Guys, can you hear me? Am I you can hear me now? Okay, great. Sorry for that. Bit of technical delay there. I apologise. We're almost done. Okay. Regionalism and the EU. Different forms of regionalism. Economic. Involves facilitating the economic links between neighbouring states in the same region. Regional organisations such as the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, US-Mexico-Canada Agreement, a focus on reducing tariffs for specific goods. The EU is the most advanced form of economic regionalism because it has established a customs union. Oh, whoops. Alright, I've accidentally got rid of the stream. My bad. Fortunately, we're near the end. I'm sorry for all the technical difficulties. Can you... What's going on here? What's the Deep doing here? He's just coming to pay a visit. Okay. I think, additionally, the EU operates a single market based on the 4 freedoms, meaning no barrier within the EU to free movement of goods, capital, services, and people. You're welcome. Nation states in the same region are likely to share the same security interests. Peacekeeping. The African Union has engaged in peacekeeping operations with the United Nations, UN in Darfur, and South Sudan. The Maastricht Treaty 1993. Glad you're not a fish with the deep about. Why? He's not bad looking, you know. Maybe you should be upset that you're not a fish. At the Maastricht Treaty, the EU established a common security and defence policy as the EU's second pillar. Political. As a result of political regionalism, nation states can establish shared political structures that allow them to respond more effectively to collective challenges. I actually know someone that peacekeeped in Somalia. I do as well, but I don't know if they're still in the stream anymore. But that is true. The Arab League. The Arab League allows member states to present a more united front in global affairs, particularly on issues involving the Arab world. The Lisbon Treaty 2009. The Lisbon Treaty created the permanent positions of the EU President and High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, providing the EU with considerable structural influence in international relations. The Arab League, formed in 1945. Now we're talking about regional organisations, objectives, and successes of organisations. So, formed in 1945, the Arab League's objectives include security and political regionalism and designed to represent Arab interests globally and encourage cooperation among Arab states. However, its successes are limited. Its lack of peacekeeping functions is its main drawback given various violences ongoing in the Middle East. For example, Palestine, Syria, Yemen, Iran, etc. You have to go now. Okay, goodbye. It's nice having you around. Sorry that we had a bit of technical errors momentarily. The African Union. Its objectives include economic, political, and security regionalism, as well as ambition to create an African free trade area with monetary union. Its successes are most significant regarding its peacekeeping missions in Mali, Somalia, and Darfur, enabling African states to take more decisive action in the region. Yet, African member states are quite reluctant to cede sovereignty to the African Union, thereby undermining its effectiveness. You have skillage? Wow, no I do not. The Association of Southeast Asian Nations. ASEAN. Formed in 1967, objectives include economic, political, and security regionalism. ASEAN has managed to dramatically reduce tariff barriers among its member states and negotiated comprehensive trade deals, including the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership (RCEP), regarding its successes. However, its commitment to member states' sovereignty means that it has made minimal progress in deepening the political connections between its members. The European Union, the EU. Objectives include economic, political, and security regionalism. The EU is considered one of the world's most advanced regional organisations. Such successes of the EU include the establishment of a single market based on the 4 freedoms, and the Lisbon Treaty 2009, providing the EU with significant structural power in international relations, establishing a multitude of things, including a European External Action Service (EEAS), yet its UK's withdrawal from the EU in 2021 shows the EU's possible declining success in forging a common European identity. Approaches intergovernmentalism, decision-making in institutions of global and regional governance in which the nation states are free to accept or reject, thus protecting its sovereignty. The UN, the world's largest general-purpose IGO, founded in 1945 with 193 member states, it maintains broader jurisdictions over international peace, human rights, security, and global development. The World Health Organization directs and coordinates international public health initiatives, manages pandemic responses, and sets global healthcare standards. The Food and Agriculture Organization leads international efforts to defeat hunger, modernize agriculture, and ensure food security for all. The IMF fosters global monetary cooperation and secures financial stability, facilitating international trade and provides loans to countries facing balance of payments crises. The World Trade Organization, the only global international organization dealing with the rules of trade between nations, it regulates trade tariffs, resolves trade disputes, and acts as a forum for negotiating trade agreement. NATO, a political and military alliance consisting of North American and European states, it is built upon the collective defense principle, where an attack on one member is considered an attack on all. Supranationalism, decision by a higher authority than a national state, which the nation state must then legally accept. The European Court of Justice, ECJ, functions as the supreme judicial authority of the EU, ensures EU law is interpreted and applied uniformly across all member states, possesses the power to strike down national laws that conflict with the EU treaties. The European Parliament, EP, acts as the directly elected legislative body of the EU, represents EU citizens directly with members elected by voters in each country, shares equal power with national governments to pass, amend, or reject EU laws. The European Central Bank, ECB, operates as the independent monetary authority for the Eurozone, defines and implements monetary policy for countries using the euro currency, controls interest rates, and holds the exclusive authority to authorize banknote issuance. The European Commission, EC, serves as the politically independent executive branch of the EU, holds the exclusive power to propose new supranational legislation, monitors member states to ensure compliance with EU rules, and manages daily business. I've lost respect for Thea. Yeah, I included that picture in there as well. Okay, and we're done. And we're done, guys. I think I've used this emoji before now that I'm thinking about it. For my end screen, but it doesn't matter. You guys don't care, I'm sure. Okay, well, thank you so much everyone for watching. If you have any last urgent pertaining questions, or just anything you just want to say thanks and goodbye, just say it now, and then we can be done. We can go on with our lives and do the exam and be done with politics forever. Unless you're doing it at uni, then you won't be done forever. I don't know. I'm just yapping now. Well, as you know, the trend on the Princess Larissa channel is that we have to put disturbing emojis at the end of every video. You hate that emoji so much. Well, I'm good. This is the point of exam structure tips. Okay, I've come a bit prepared this time. So for the 12 marker, you don't want an introduction. Maybe you want one line with a definition. And then you want to do 3 paragraphs where you introduce the similarity or difference you'll be pertaining to, if it's that kind of question. And then you compare them and you use all the lovely examples in my video. And then you do that 3 times and you have 3 paragraphs. And you shouldn't spend any more than about 15 minutes or so on it. So there you go. And for the 30 marker, you get nothing. Are you going to go over American politics? No. Don't even ask me such silly questions. In fact, you're banned. Let me just... What a silly comment. How do I delete that? Wait, I just realised you guys have XP. How do I... I just looked at something that said you guys had like different XP, and now it's not showing me anymore. Oh, it's gone. That's a shame. Well, anyways, thank you guys. If you have nothing else to say, I suppose we will be done. American politics is that. I don't want to say that because I'm gonna get banned. No, I won't. Global politics is not better though. I'd rather just do neither. I'd rather there's no paper 3 at all. At the top. Well, I'm looking at the comments on my phone, so I'm sorry I don't really see it. Hello. But why are you doing? The kind of people joining the stream now when the stream is over.
Are you early? That's a good one. The streams. You could be early if you just scrolled back in the video and then you'd be back in time. Literally missed the whole stream. Now we're just on the disgusting end of the screen with the horrible emoji. It's okay though. No, the stream, you can watch it. It's gonna upload immediately after I'm done. So, paper 1 supremacy. That's very true. Paper 1 is the best paper, I'd say. It's the most interesting one. Paper 2 is okay. Paper 3, the worst. Don't worry, you can do paper 4 early. Yeah, I'm gonna start my paper 4 stream in a minute. Okay. As much as it's fun talking to you guys, I am gonna have to be done. Cause now, or do I have to be? We could just continue. We could just start. We could do American politics now, just for no reason. Get the emoji outfit. Okay, fine. I'll get the emoji outfit, and so you guys can look at something more comfortable. I don't really know what else picture to put, so let me. Can I make a drawing? I don't think I can. There we go. Is that better for you? What is Gorash? No. Alright. Thank you guys. We're done now. Actually. Have a good evening, everyone. Good luck tomorrow. You're all gonna do incredibly. And I hope the stream helps. Cool. Bye.